other interviews have described yourself as like a tinkerer. How did you do that? How did you not get discouraged?
You're basically saying, I don't care.
Alexi Nazem, co-founder and CEO of Nomad Health, a nationwide shortage of doctors and nurses. By taking a page out of Airbnb's playbook,
Cut out the red tape, processes, the expense.
This is the gig economy for healthcare.
And a big fundraise, $63 million.
Microsoft and Google both announcing they're laying off 12,000.
Nomad recently, it's public, had to lay off about 17% of people. How has being a doctor informed you on handling tough decisions like this? And how did you handle it personally?
That's an excellent question. You have a future as a journalist.
2015 was a really pivotal year for you. At that point, you had already finished HBS, Yale Medical School, of course, Yale undergrad, but you're at a crossroads. I'd love to hear about the decisions you made and really the journey in that year and what it was like for you.
Not only had I finished school, I'd also just finished my residency training. So I was really finally, after literally decades of schooling, ready to officially begin my professional career. It was a moment that I was really working up towards for a long time. Finally arriving at that moment was, first of all, exciting. And second of all, a little bit confusing to a degree because the things that I wanted to do were not the kind of things that you could kind of make to happen. I mean, obviously, fast forward all these years later, I've been lucky to start a company that's done okay and survived and thrived. And I knew that's what I wanted to do, but that's not the kind of thing that you plan to do. Unlike interviewing on campus position where they're going to hire, 30 people or something like that. It's not the kind of thing that you can plan for. I knew that what I wanted to do was some combination of medicine and business. That's why I had gone to medical school and business school. It's why I had done the jobs that I had done, met people that I had met. I left my residency, unlike nearly all of my, cohort, without any fellowship or onward plan. The only thing that I did was I organized to do a half-time job
Mm.
as a doctor at New York Presbyterian Hospital. They knew I wanted to be in New York. And then I said, I know I'm going to fill the other half and more with something that's entrepreneurial, something in the business world, but I didn't know what. I had some ideas. I was going around pitching some concepts to people and just meeting interesting investors, founders, technology people, but I didn't know where it was going to go. So I finished my residency on June 20th of 2015, and I had a half-time job that would cover my rent, and that was it. And amazingly, I thought it was going to take a long time, but I was just very lucky. I met my co-founder of the business that I'm now running on July 9th. 2015. So a
Wow.
full 19 days of uncertainty. I was just very lucky. And that was like this, sort of pivotal moment and a kind of a moment of tension and uncertainty.
You've often in other interviews have described yourself as like a tinkerer. That is like the opposite of like most doctors. I come from the long line of doctors, you as well. They are the most conservative, risk averse. It's a very different type of orbit, right? Doing
Mhm.
business. And how did you go about pressure testing different ideas and be able to decide if Nomad was the right one?
Yeah. First, a word on medical culture. I think in some ways you're absolutely right. Physicians, especially, but almost everyone in healthcare are risk averse and
Mm.
not interested in big bets that have risk. On the other hand, almost all medical progress has been the result of tinkering. How about if I try a little bit of this? Or how about if I, give a little bit of that medicine? Or what happens if you eat this mushroom? Or like all this kind of weird stuff. There is a degree of controlled tinkering,
Mm.
i.e., science and experimentation that has driven medicine forward. But it is, you're right, in a very controlled, not risk free, but risk mitigated environment. So there's an inherent conservatism in medicine, which is a big reason why I never could see myself doing that exclusively. So how did I test out ideas? In my entire medical career, I would always carry around a little notebook in my white coat pocket. Anytime I saw something that didn't work particularly well or seemed like it could be made better,
Uh-huh.
I just wrote it down. Sometimes it was like a really big thing and sometimes a really small thing. Small thing would be like, gosh, there's not enough elevators to move the patients fast enough. Big things were, this person has no insurance, no pathway to insurance, and yet it's the one thing that they absolutely need in order
Mhm.
to be healthy. Just starting with a list of problems was a really important thing for me. It was what drew me to go start something. So
Mm.
how did I test the ideas out? Well, all right, well, there's a problem. First of all, is it worth solving? Is it big
Sure.
enough? If you can solve it, what would the solution be? What would it look like? And then would it be viable? Would someone actually pay for it? Each of those things required a little bit of testing, a little bit of research, a little mix of both for most things. I would actually spend time either writing up a memo about what the solution would look like or build a pitch deck or something so I could explain it to somebody else. They always say that if you can actually teach something, then you actually understand it. So I wanted to be able to explain why I thought the idea was so good, why the solution was so good. I did that so many times. I built so
Uh,
many different things. I have a Dropbox folder that says startup ideas.
dude, yeah.
And there's like all
Literally,
these subfolders with a bunch of not good ones and, some other ones that would turn out to be okay.
Not bad, not bad.
One of the things that was very great about where I did all this training, school, and all, I met so many great people that I could go talk to and just say like, "Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this?" And I would pitch them the idea, and then they poke holes in it, and then I'll get a little bit better. And I'll go to the next person and iterate on it some more. And that just gave me a nose for at least something that's worth pulling the thread on further. And saying, "Hey, maybe I'll throw my hat in and do a little bit more than just think about it on the nights and weekends." But you never really test an idea until you start building a business around it.
for
But at
sure,
least
for
you
sure.
can filter that giant top of the funnel.
Definitely. To pick on the part of when you talked about having that network and you were talking to them to get their input, a lot of the times, right? It's you go to these people that have dedicated their careers, right? It could be the chemical industry, it could be chemists, right? Healthcare, it could be doctors, but they're most likely going to tell you, no, this is why it can't work. These are the current red tape rules, the current boundaries, but you just have to push through that. For you, how did you do that? Like, how did you not get discouraged when I imagine you probably had people being like, this doesn't make sense. Like, this is the way it's been forever. That's how it's going to be. I'm curious, how did you push through those no's?
That's a great question, and like a perfect entrepreneurial question. If you want to go on that journey to be a founder, you have to have a certain degree of willful ignorance. You're basically saying, okay, I hear you. I don't care. I'm going to keep doing this. You have to also have some healthy respect for the skepticism. If you keep banging your head against the wall and you don't break through at some point, you should listen to that signal. Not even being willing to get up and try to change something and break something means that you're probably going to have a hard time pushing through the many other obstacles that will certainly come up along the way. It's like a little bit of an attitudinal thing. If you want to be sure that every time you can break through or clear the wall, this is not the right professional pathway for someone. But if you're a tinkerer and you want to see if it'll work, there's a certain appeal to trying to break it and then do it a different way. The other thing is understanding not what is the local problem, but what is the global opportunity. If you can step back and say, well, but if we figured these problems out, this could happen and this could happen and this could happen, and it would be so much better for all of these people in all of these different ways, then you have a degree of motivation that will power you through some of those things. And let's be honest, most obstacles, let's talk about healthcare. The healthcare system is a construct of human beings. It is not like some immutable law of the universe. So in
Sure.
theory, you should be able
To change it.
yeah,
Yeah.
to change it. It was
Yeah.
made, it can be unmade and made better. So some degree of attitude, some degree of context and perspective, and then some degree of just willingness to do first principles thinking and break things down and say, well, this was made to be this way and it served a purpose for its time. It doesn't make sense anymore. We can probably unwind it. It's hard to unwind it, but I think we can do it and it'll be worth it.
I have so many directions I could go with that. Someone close to both of us, I won't say who it is, they said in the early days of Nomad, you would go out on the weekends, hang out with him and all the other Iranians in New York, but you just like disappeared. Like you were just in pure grind mode. Talk about those early days of really building and what it was like.
I mean, that is true in those early days. If you really want to make something out of nothing, you've got to really put in the time. You don't have a lot of money. You don't have a lot of people. If you want to get something done, you got to do it yourself. There's also some real value in extended periods of work because you kind of build up these constructs in your mind. You have these mental breakthroughs. You kind of got to do it. I mean, there's like no way. Well, I don't know the counterfactual. I didn't do a 9 to 5, founder journey, and I couldn't tell. And so I don't know. That could work too. But you hear so many stories about grinding, grinding, grinding. And that's always been my personality too. I love like working through the middle of the night. I found something that I like to sink my teeth into. I really enjoyed the problem and the few people that I was working on it with. You also have to recognize that it was a perfect moment in my life. I wasn't married. I didn't have any children. I had no dependents. I had enough money for my clinical work to support my life. I had the freedom to work on something until 3 o'clock in the morning rain or all the way to the sunrise. Yeah, it was hard. It was exhausting, but I was motivated both because it was a very interesting idea and I wanted to sort of flesh it out. There was also a very personal motivation. I was really transitioning, from a classical medical pathway. I mean, I went to business school, I had some jobs. Realistically, I was trained to be a doctor. I thought I was going to not be terribly excited there. So I needed to be able to work in some other space. And I just had to prove it to myself and to others, but especially to myself that I could do it.
The point on like working late at night, when you said that, it's music to my ears because one, it's quieter. No one's slacking, no one's texting you, no one's emailing. That's where the best ideas come from. Those early years of building, a really important figure was Kevin Ryan. I don't think I've seen anyone other than Elon Musk, Rich Barton from Zillow, Expedia, and Glassdoor, and maybe like Howard Hughes and Branson be able to incubate and build so many different types of businesses in so many different industries. I would love to hear you describe him, maybe give some context on the types of businesses he started and how'd you meet him in the early days of that relationship?
Kevin is a very important figure in the Nomad story, a very important figure in my own story. He's a really wonderful, interesting, intelligent person. He's like a sort of larger than life character. A friend of mine who was an investor in one of his other businesses. And this friend of mine was one of the people that I was talking about my ideas with. At the time, Kevin was investing in the healthcare space. Obviously, I was trying to do something in the healthcare space, entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
And we got put together. Kevin is a very fascinating guy because he has built businesses, as you said, in so many different areas. He was first the president and then the CEO of DoubleClick, which was this .com era ads innovator, really the first ad tech company of any meaningful size. And then it later ended up getting sold to Google, and it's now a big part of Google's ads engine.
Yeah.
To the point where I think actually the government is trying to get them to divest it.
It is the ads engine. It is literally Google's business. That ad network is DoubleClick.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And then from there, taking all of those, skills and knowledge, kept founding and running and founding and running and founding and running so many other companies. I think the biggest success was MongoDB, which is this huge software public company now. He started Business Insider, which is in a totally different business.
Yeah.
It's a, online publication. Started the Gilt Groupe, which is that online fashion thing.
And
Zola,
Zola.
the wedding registry. There's just like one after the other, and they're all in different industries. And I think what the only common thread through all of them is that I said this before about first principles thinking. Kevin kind of just like takes a view on things that he comes across and says like, this makes no sense. Why is it done this way? So there's this willingness to just kind of reimagine how things are done. And then a boldness, which I think is very critical to his success. And it's something that has made a big impact on me. As much as I'm, like a tinkerer and risk-seeking type of a person, I still came from this medical world. I was the most risk-seeking of the conservative people. It doesn't make you the most risk-seeking person on the planet. Kevin is always saying, can you do it faster? Can you do it bigger? Can you do it better? It takes someone like that with that fire in their belly to be as innovative and successful as he obviously has been.
Was it ever intimidating? I'll give a personal anecdote is like when I meet people like that, there's one guy in particular, I won't say his name also, but I'll send it to him. He has his finger in multiple businesses. CEO of one company, founded another one that was a unicorn. He's like, dude, I just made a website and now it's doing $1 million in ARR. And I'm just like, don't understand. It wasn't him being a jerk anyways or bragging. It was just, that's just how he is. Did you ever have that kind of like, wow, I need to live up to that at all? What was that kind of for you personally when you look at him?
I was never intimidated. I don't think that's the right word. I was definitely inspired. This is somebody who's done the kind of thing that I want to do. And I'm very excited to partner with him and learn as well as bring something of my own to the table. Like I said, I don't think I was intimidated. I was definitely inspired. A lot of the credit for that has to go to Kevin himself. I mean, he's a very approachable, very personable guy. Definitely a big personality. Like I said, he's a bold person and he moves fast. He's engaging in a way that I think people are intimidating if they don't want to engage with you. But if they're interested in talking to you and they think that you have something to offer, all of a sudden it doesn't feel like some massive differential of which you should be petrified. He's very good at bridging those kind of gaps.
Nomad has raised about 200 million combo of equity and debt. Fundraising is usually this on the outside euphoric thing from TechCrunch. Was there any part of that story of the fundraising side, whether it be from Kevin, whether it be from Polaris, any of the investors where it wasn't that fun, where you almost said no?
Yeah, I mean, I think that any person who has raised capital, I'm sure there's a few small exceptions, but it's always hard. It's a very challenging process. And that's what it is. It's a process. It takes time. It's not like you say, oh, I want some money, and then they throw you some money. I mean, like if you only read TechCrunch or something like that, of course, that's what it would look like. It's just a series of hit after hit after hit. But it's not like that ever. We had some easier times and some harder times, but it was never absolutely easy. It was a grind. I enjoyed a lot of it. It's the even bigger version of what I was saying to you before, how I test my ideas when I was all on my own. Let me go try and convince somebody else that this thing that I think is a great idea is a great idea. Fundraising is essentially that, which is like you're trying to get someone to join you on your ride in a very meaningful way, especially in the early stages where it's a lot more promise than practice. It's really fun. You're painting a picture for people, even though it's very hard, actually, maybe even harder. You really only have the promise part. You can't just fall back on performance. That part is fun, but for sure, every single time it's been some version of a slog. It's not something that I like want to do all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. There's always like positive news, but sometimes there's like negative news. With like every company out there, there's definitely pain in the markets, right? Nomad recently, it's public, had to lay off about 17% of people. How has being a doctor informed you on handling tough decisions like this? And how did you handle it personally?
Wow.
Sorry to put you on the spot
That's
there.
okay. I mean, there are all manner of difficult things that you have to do. You live long enough, you're going to have to deal with some adversity. Our company is almost 8 years old. And so certainly you're going to have your ups and you'll also have your downs. Thankfully, we've had many more ups than we've had, downs. But no matter what, there's just like hard things along the way. At the time that they happen, some of these hard things feel like the hardest thing ever, and you'll never be able to get past it. But then you do, and it makes the next hard thing a little bit easier to approach because you know that you've gotten through some adversity before. It doesn't make it any less challenging. It just gives you a little bit more sustenance to
Mm,
get through it. You asked me, well, how does my background as a doctor impact some of this stuff? 2 or 3 things come to mind. The first is that you've got to lead with care. The reason that you are there is to help in whatever way that you can. Obviously, the opposite of acting with care is acting with malice. If you are acting without malice and you're trying to do the right thing, make the best of a difficult situation, and genuinely empathize with the other people who are in this situation with you, I think that helps. It also, in some ways, makes it a little harder too, because you are injecting emotion into business decisions. And so, an extra nuance to the challenge.
for
But I think
sure.
ultimately, starting with leading with care is very important. That's certainly what you do in medicine. The other thing that I think that's true from medicine is that context is important. No decision is made in a vacuum. There are
Mhm.
many antecedent factors and influencing factors. Recognize there's some things that you do control, some things that you don't control. Focus on the things that you do control. Try to bring along the folks helping to make the decision with you or going to be impacted by the decision by explaining the context and the possible onward outcomes, etc. And I think the final thing from medicine, but I actually think it's just it's good everywhere. It's very important to be truthful in upfront, explaining what you do know, what you don't know, how you're thinking, not trying to operate on multiple planes, but just be straight with people. That also goes a very long way through hard moments. Those are all things that I learned in my practice of medicine. You have to deal with a lot of hard things, even much higher stakes in some ways
Mm.
in medicine than in business. I think that the lessons translate, they're not directly, but they do definitely influence how I lead.
You talked a bit about giving context, being truthful with people. The main part of this is interacting with a lot of different people. It wasn't just a decision that came on to you, right? It was a whole team probably that had to think about, is this the right action we have to take? In another interview you did, you talked about how working with hospitals are not corporations, but rather federations of distributed decision making. And that was a very interesting way to put it. However, you've cracked the code. Despite all the different nuances with every state, different rules, different licenses, you were able to enter one market, replicate, enter one market, replicate. That's incredible on like a micro scale. And then I think about like Operation Warp Speed during COVID. And I remember so vividly, I was driving from DC, and on the day that the FDA approved the vaccine for public use, 10 18-wheelers are surrounded by law enforcement driving from DC, I don't know where in DC, going to Hopkins. And I was like, oh my God, like it felt like we were winning. I don't know. It felt like
Yeah.
a sports team, you know? It's like, it
Yeah.
was an amazing thing. I was like, wow, like we actually like pulled it off. But it seems like with like nothing else in terms of government and other regulated industries like healthcare, there hasn't been any sense of like winning. What will it take to have this sense of cooperation and the sense of victory come back in the US healthcare system in terms of reducing the cost of care, improving care, and so forth?
It's an interesting question. I also remember that moment. I wasn't driving on the thing, but I saw I think it was December 14th, 20 correctly. And
Exactly. Yeah.
seared in everyone's mind because we were all in this like battle together, and we were like, "Yeah, the cavalry's coming!"
Yeah,
It's really
literally.
exciting. And we saw the trucks rolling out, and I think there was a factory
The
in
most
Michigan.
ambitious vaccination effort in American history.
I remember that. I think what's different from that situation and quote unquote fixing healthcare is that that was a nation fighting a singular enemy. So much so that actually it was leveraging legislation and rules that were built for the defense industry. I mean, that's literally how analogous to war
Mhm.
what happened in the pandemic was, at least from the vaccine perspective. When you talk about fixing healthcare, there isn't a singular enemy. There are so many unique, nuanced problems, some small, some big, that you can't war on it. It's kind of like when in the 70s, President Nixon declared war on cancer. Cancer is not a single entity. The reason you can't win that war is that there's no limit to the enemies. You can't define what victory even is. It's sort of the same thing in healthcare, but there are definitely things that we can do that will have broad positive impact. One thing is to reduce the sort of like federation nature of healthcare. You saw the negative impacts of that during COVID. The fact that we don't have a standardized, centralized anything in healthcare meaningfully inhibited our ability to fight a public health emergency. The fact that every state has different rules about licensing, every hospital has different rules about credentialing, every clinician has a slightly different way of solving this or that problem means that there is an extraordinary sort of like diversion and blossoming of different versions of systems. In some ways, it's great because it allows you to sort of seek
Sure.
out the best method. But on the other hand, there are definitely things that would just benefit from having standardization, whether you're talking about how we pay for healthcare, which is probably the single largest negative impact of fragmentation, that you've got Medicare, Medicaid, which is 50 different Medicaids, dozens of private insurance companies, and then there's self-pay, like, and then there's value-based care, and then there's fee-based services. That's just one area where fragmentation is leading to real problems. Well, if you could just like eliminate 1 degree of that, fragmentation, you would have broad-based impact. Same thing about our world with Nomad is thinking about how providers work. Okay, well,
Mm,
if you
mm,
standardize credentials, standardize licenses, that a New York doctor can work in Illinois without having to do anything different. Addressing some of those things, introducing some degree of standardization. I don't think we need to go all the way to like a programmed healthcare economy. That would be negative, but I don't
mhm.
think we need to have this sort of like a million beautiful pieces kind of situation that we've got right now, which I think caused so much of the waste and huge expense, but also a lot of the like frustration and the quality of the experience dealing with healthcare, and probably
Mhm.
as a result impacting negatively actual health outcomes. So the short answer to your question, I just gave the long answer. The short answer is like focus on a few areas and provide some degree of standardization.
So this is a question I have been thinking about for the past couple weeks. Big tech obviously has to enter new markets to move the needle in terms of value creation. Apple, Microsoft, Google, probably Facebook eventually. And then you have fast, nimble startups. Who do you think will have the bigger impact on healthcare in the long term? Is it big tech or is it startups?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I'd wager on fast, nimble startups. I think the scale of impact that Amazon or an Apple or a Google can have is obviously so much greater, but scale is not where you start. You actually need to have a good innovation in approach, in technology, in science, something. It's unusual for that kind of innovation to come out of a very large entity, much less one that is not actively participating in the space as part of its core business. I don't want to bet against Google or Apple on this.
Mm,
And I know they're trying really hard to make inroads into these spaces. And I think they are going to have a positive impact. In many ways, they already are.
mhm,
But the greatest positive impact that they can probably have is bringing to large scale an innovation that was developed on the periphery. It doesn't mean that they can't catch lightning in a bottle. They might. Scale is a virtue in its own right, and it might enable certain kinds of innovations that literally are impossible without scale. Example of this would be, I think Apple's already trying to do this. There's like 1.5 billion Apple devices around the world. What if all of a sudden your Apple device or your iOS became the backbone of electronic medical records? No startup could do that. Yeah, there are certainly some kinds of things that they could do that would be very impactful. But I think really path-breaking innovation is going to come from the outside in, that Schumpeterian creative destruction that has remade so many industries or made new ones entirely.
For sure. I think on one side, I think of like the Apple Watch. There was recently an article about a no prick diabetes monitor, a glucose monitor. I have one as well. Dexcom is going to get wrecked, like if that happens. But also, like when I was in college, I consulted for like an internship sort of endeavor with Alnylam Pharmaceuticals. So they do
Mhm.
like really niche biotech. They have a drug that is for an ultra orphan disease. 5,000 customers, patients around the world. Apple can't risk it, right? If so, I think one benefit with the startups is like they can go after these like kind of obscure niche market needs that the big guys can't. If it doesn't provide 100 billion or quarter trillion in value creation, like there's no point. These guys have stakeholders and public market institutions that are kind of weighing them. And now Alnylam went from, I think it was 5 billion when I was in college. Now it's worth 27, almost 30 billion because the drug got approved for the FDA. It's interesting.
That framing is very important. You asked me the question, well, who's going to have a bigger impact on healthcare, big
Mm,
tech or small companies? Healthcare is huge. It covers so much territory. It's everything from pharmaceuticals to services, to prevention. I mean, like so many different things. Only some of those things are rational targets for big tech companies. To your point,
mm,
right? Needs to benefit from their scale. It needs to benefit from the fact that their core assets are technology based, whether software or hardware. Some things like making a drug are not in the wheelhouse of those companies, nor should they ever be. You know what would make healthcare really much better? Is if you could cure diabetes tomorrow, come up with a technology that can replicate beta islet cells in the pancreas of a type 1 diabetic. You would instantly wipe billions and billions of dollars off of expense, massively improve health outcomes for millions and millions of people across the world. That would be a huge impact to healthcare in so many positive ways. From a cost perspective, a health outcomes perspective, there's zero opportunity for a technology company to do that.
mhm,
So, like I said, you don't want to bet against those guys, but there's a very small list of things that they are better equipped to fix than anyone else. They can go out and buy a lot of these small companies and then bring them to scale. And that would also be its own contribution. But
mm.
a very complicated topic with no clear right answer, but definitely an interesting question stem.
Shifting topics a bit. For you personally, when do you feel most alive?
Oh, really when I'm just with my family. I have a young son now. He's a little over 2 years old, and that makes you feel very alive and just also appreciate what life is, watching this little person go from just an infant, 6.5 pounds, to a running, talking, jumping, opinionated human being, and he's only 2.5 years old. That just tells you a lot about life. And so I feel very alive and fortunate in those moments. What does it mean to be alive? Is like to feel something, to sort of like recognize that you are who you are, you're in the
Mm,
world. Those emotions are obviously most stimulated by family and close friends, relationships, really, ultimately.
mhm. I'll tell you, Rumi will thank you later when he gets a bit more aware of what's going on in the world because you named him Rumi. You didn't name him Bahram or something really complicated in the English language. So you guys are already doing great as parents.
Oh,
So like,
thank you. Yeah, well, we're trying. He's going to be successful and happy of his own right. Has nothing to do with what we do for him. But I'm
for
glad he's
sure.
going to like his. I hope he likes his name.
No, for sure. In terms of the topic of parents, you yourself have two awesome parents that are some of the most like successful and important Iranian Americans. I'd love if you could provide quick context on them as well as a story that maybe can paint their character and how it impacted you growing up.
You're right. Both of my parents are Iranian Americans, and they are very different from each other in some very important ways, but also very similar to each other, which I think makes them a very good married couple and great parent. My mother still is a business journalist. She was one of the very first journalists focused on business and also one of the first television anchors in that field. And not to mention, of course, a woman. So, really leading figure in many ways and a trailblazer in many ways. Her primary area of focus professionally has been about understanding leadership. She's gotten to interview everyone from CEOs to presidents to athletes, just understanding what it means to be out in front. That has been a very interesting pursuit from which I've learned a lot. And then, of course, being a journalist, her skill set is in communication and excellent writing, able to draw out really interesting
Mhm.
information. My father is a venture capitalist, also sort of a first. He started his first venture fund in 1972, I believe, which
Oh
is
my
like
gosh.
really early days. Not the first, but he often talks about how in those days, I think you could probably gather all of the venture capitalists in the world into a hotel conference room, small one. His background was in science. He was a chemist and nuclear physicist, and then made the transition into business, specifically in investing, and did a lot of investing in hard tech stuff. So, like semiconductors, computers, and later into healthcare technology, like biotech, life sciences, that kind of stuff, and also healthcare services like insurance.
Hmm.
Very early stage investor. They've had a very big impact on my life, obviously, in many ways. On the professional side, I saw two people who were very committed to their work, very interested in breaking new ground, and passionate about the work. Like it didn't feel like a job. My father likes to say, and obviously it's not his saying, but he says, if you love your work, you'll never work a day in your life. If you just derive joy from what you're doing, you're going to have a lot of longevity. I mean, my parents are in their 70s and 80s and they're still working, not because they need to, but because they like it. That had, I think, a big impact on what I wanted to do. Like, I wasn't just looking for a job, I was looking for something that I found very exciting. It's easy to work till 3 o'clock in the morning to start a
Mm,
company when you find
mm.
it very interesting. The other thing I think from them professionally, they always prioritize, both of them, quality over quantity. It's better to do things right than anything else. I'm sure that they could have gotten, even further or faster or higher or whatever if they didn't think that way. But I think there's a real pride in their product. Again, because they loved what they were doing, it was worth it to do it the right way. On a personal level, listen, I mean, the lessons are infinite. It's been, and I keep learning them. They taught me things when I was 5 years old, and they're teaching me things when I'm 40 years old because I'm different stage of my life. And they're 20 to 40, whatever, how many years ahead of me that they are. Ultimately, I think the most important thing is despite all their high powered and very engaging professional careers, their primary focus was always at home. It was on me and my sister and our family, also our extended family. My parents were home for dinner and they would come to our television sports games and didn't take a lot of trips without us. They were focused on family. And I think that that has been more than anything. All the other lessons derive from the fact that they're there and they're committed and they're interested. That was obviously very influential on my own development, but it's also influencing the way that I'm running my own family life. As I said, I keep learning the lessons, but I think their greatest contribution to me was more on the family and values side than on anything professionally. Although certainly their professional lives and their accomplishments were very inspirational to me. They're my personal board of directors on a lot of stuff. I just got a message from my dad this morning. He's counseling me on something related to work. So I've been very lucky to be their son.
I didn't interact with your mom as much as your father in New York when I was there for your son's birthday, but your dad was like, "I gotta get out of here. I gotta work on this like M&A transaction." I was like, "What?" like it's amazing because the thing my family's always said is you work to live, you don't live to work. And he really, you could tell the stories of when he was like with
Yeah.
Don Valentine in the early days. It wasn't even cool to be a VC. It's so interesting. It's very contagious. The last few things I'd love to ask you are, so there is different phases of Alexi Nazem. There's the business kind of medicine kid, the doctor, the tech founder, the father. What do you think is the next phase of your life going forward?
I mean, whatever it is that I do next, I know that it will be new. It'll be different. That's the thing that has always propelled me is the opportunity to uncover something new for me. I like exploring and expanding my horizons. But I also like doing things that take advantage of the things that I know and love already. So it's going to be some blend of all of those things. You sort of like mixed my personal and professional lives, which is actually really true. I mean, everything's very integrated for me. More than anything, I just wanna be Rumi's dad and Sufi's husband. That's like I said, that's how I feel really alive, so no matter what, that will be happening forevermore. Professionally, I don't know what will come next, but like I said, it will be new. It won't look like something I've already done.
Last question to that kid that's in Iran, to this young generation of Iranians, what advice do you have for them on taking risks, on navigating these challenging times?
Yeah. Well, to kids in Iran, I mean, it's an entirely different thing. Well, not entirely different, but I think to a new degree. Almost everything to move forward in life there involves some degree of risk. I mean, taking a bet, don't be afraid of taking risks. Risks can have rewards, but don't be stupid in taking risks either, especially in a place where the consequence of failure can be very substantial. Eliminating that geographic factor for a moment and just, talking to any young person, follow your heart. Life is short. It's not, in other words, long enough to do things that you don't care about with people that you don't care about. Try to do things with heart, with passion, with vigor. Take some bets, put yourself on the line a little bit. As they say, nothing ventured, nothing gained. All along the way, try to enjoy it. You never know what's going to come tomorrow. It would be really a shame to not, enjoy every moment that you get.
Certainly. This was an awesome conversation. Learned so much. I could talk to you for hours, but there's only so many hours in the day. So thank you.
Very
This was
kind. I've
great.
enjoyed it too. You are very good at asking those incisive questions that draw out kinds of interesting answers. So you have a future as a journalist.